This is Jackie Weisfield. I am recording this for EDL 851, talking about legal aspects of teacher evaluation. I've included a brief overview with a connection to Englewood Public Schools, which is where I'm currently teaching. I started with ESSA and teacher evaluation and learned that ESSA allows states to design their own teacher evaluation systems, that ESSA does not require them to have student test scores as a major component. Student test scores are required to be a component, but not necessarily the 50% or more that some states and districts use. Within ESSA, it is required that teachers and other educational professionals need to minimally be consulted on the evaluation procedures, and those consultations need to be what were deemed meaningful consultations. So that's going to mean that it can't be somebody outside the organization saying, here's what we've got, just check that off. It's all sides, all parties coming to the table and saying, this is what we need to accurately reflect what we do in the classroom. This is what it should look like. These are the kinds of things you should be looking for. Both teachers and educational professionals doing those things. It puts the onus back on the states regarding education. So federal influence is really lessened through ESSA, which I thought was interesting. Because teacher evaluation systems have become so high stakes, the evaluation systems have come under the scrutiny of the courts in several states, and I'm going to go through several states and just kind of update where we are on some of the rulings. So in Florida, the courts upheld that school-wide growth measures could be used for teachers who are not part of the state testing system. So it might be your specials teachers, it might be your world language teachers, anyone who is not part of that state testing system would have the school-wide growth measure in their evaluation rather than those test scores. And Florida also upheld the ability to provide merit pay for teachers based on their evaluations and or student test scores. In Louisiana, they allowed teacher evaluation to impact both tenure and pay scales without violating the Louisiana Constitution. Typically, those two things would have to be separated, but they have said it can impact both tenure and pay scales. In Nevada, teachers have a right to due process and cannot be stripped of post-probationary status or fired without due process, regardless of if they have consecutive ineffective evaluation ratings, which is a big win for teachers. Being able to be fair with teachers and allow them to go through due process, provide that body of evidence, and it provides them a place of recourse if they are rated ineffective. In New Mexico, the evaluation system that was put into place by the State Secretary of Education was upheld, but there are still some questions of whether or not appropriate data was used for teachers and the appropriate amount of data was used for certain teachers. So those are still out in New Mexico. In New York, they have found that the evaluation process does not fully take into account factors of poverty in the student growth measure. And that's a really interesting case at this point. It's really hard to quantify the impact of poverty, and the way that students are going to be impacted by poverty is going to be very different for different students, and so that will be interesting to hear more about. In Tennessee, school-wide growth measures are allowed in teacher evaluations, and that use of scores was upheld, but it was determined by the courts that it's not a judicial decision, but a democratic decision. And so the courts are like, we're stepping out. if you all need to play nice and determine what you're going to use in teacher evaluations at a district level. The courts are not going to take this over. The courts are not going to rule on this. Your state Department of Education and your teachers need to work together, as well as your districts. In Texas, it was found that the student growth algorithms were vague and that they lacked transparency, and so those are no longer being used. I pulled out a specific court case in New York and looked into that a little bit more. The Lederman court case in New York, Lederman v. King. The court found in favor of the teacher who was going to be dismissed based on an ineffective rating, but her rating of ineffective points-wise was almost the same as the year before, within like a nominal number of points, and she was rated effective. And so it was this value-added measure that was in the evaluation system that really impacted her evaluation score. And so the court actually found that the use of value-added measures can lead to what they said were arbitrary and capricious evaluation scores. And part of that comes from the lack of transparency and the lack of understanding of those value-added measures. It's very difficult in education to get a value-added measure. You're always working with different students. Every year, if you're going to try and trace a person's performance over a number of years, working with different students is going to give you different results. Working in different content is going to give you different results. Working in different grade levels is going to give you different results. And so the value-added measures are very difficult to use in education. Overall, Race to the Top really re-emphasized teacher evaluation, with the government giving money to schools and districts and states that revamped the evaluation system and other areas. You get a very competitive market. And so part of Race to the Top's emphasis on teacher evaluation really created this movement towards a more high-stakes teacher evaluation. It was required that student achievement data be in that evaluation, and that there be at least 3 levels of performance: highly effective, effective, and ineffective. There has recently again been a movement away from those value-added measures that were in a lot of the initial plans. In Englewood, we have a very clear purpose for evaluation, and it's very much not about getting rid of teachers. It's not about rating teachers as ineffective, but it's really about creating high-quality classrooms for all students. And so we'll focus on personal and professional growth, feedback, actionable next steps, all of those things that really would be more coaching, collaborative conversations we want to have with teachers about what those next steps will look like, and problem solving. And so really, even at the administrator level, it looks much more like a coaching conversation than it does an evaluation conversation. And the goal is really alignment in achieving our goals. So we want the teachers to achieve their personal professional goals, and we also want them to work towards our goals aligned to school improvement, which again creates a much more collaborative environment. We're not working against each other as teachers. We're really trying to reach the best for our kids and doing school improvement. And then our other focus is really high quality, effective instruction for all students. The way that we do this is we focus on the 5 required standards by the state. I teacher being a master of content and pedagogy, creating a learning environment that is conducive to learning for diverse learners, teacher planning and delivery of instruction, teacher reflection, and teacher leadership. And so the leadership piece might be a PLC, working with parents, those pieces. And those 5 standards are really based on those observations. Those comprise 50% of the evaluation, with 30% being the school performance framework, which again provides that collaborative environment. You are not off on your own. 30% of your evaluation comes from how well the school does. So all of your teachers, your whole team. 10% is the district performance framework, so where you have a little less of an influence, but then also your individual attributes. And so that would be our standard 6, which is really focused on student growth. So teachers create a personal, professional goal based on student growth about what they want to see in their classrooms. And they have to show that 70% of their students or more make a year's growth in a year in order to not be rated ineffective. So if they are between 70 and close to 80, they're rated partially effective. Between 80 and almost 90, they're effective. And 90 to 100% of their students make a year's growth in a year, they're rated highly effective. In terms of the teacher process and recourse, probationary teachers are observed twice a year. That's that big 50% section. Non-probationary teachers are required to be observed 1 time a year. And this is in an evaluative capacity. Those observations need to be a minimum of 30 minutes. Non-probationary teachers may appeal ratings of ineffective or partially effective, but the teacher needs to provide all of that documentation. So they provide their body of evidence. That is reviewed by the superintendent, and what the superintendent decides about that evaluation rating is what stands for the teacher. For me, in doing this module, I really found a need to collaborate with the teachers union a lot to make sure that I'm following that negotiated agreement. Then I need to do meticulous documentation of what I'm seeing when I'm in classrooms so that I have that evidence to go back to. Approaching it from a lens of improving instruction, especially if I'm remaining in Englewood, since that's really our focus. Making that evaluation process meaningful for teachers is also very important, and staying up to date on current laws and statutes in the state, as well as federal legislation and new court rulings. Those are going to be really important as I become an administrator. Thank you so much for watching.